If Republicans don't embrace a lot of the libertarian ideas that Ron Paul's talking about, like monetary policy, individual liberty, constitutional limited government, these things should not be alien to any Republican. The new debate in the Republican Party needs to be between conservatives and libertarians.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Matt Welch of Reason, and today we're talking with Senator Jim DeMint, a Republican from South Carolina. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Nick, Matt, it's great to be with you.
Jim DeMint has been a U.S. Congressman from 1999 to 2005. He's been a senator from the, the Palmetto State?
Palmetto State, right.
Since 2006. And you have promised to retire at the end of your current term in 2016?
That's exactly right. Most people stay here too long. The longer you're here, the more you're part of a system and the less you remember about what really makes the country great. So there are a few exceptions to that, but term limits would fix most of our problems.
Well, we appreciate your candor, and we're going to hold you to that promise in 2016. We're talking about your new book, Now or Never, Saving America from Economic Collapse, which has a foreword by Rand Paul, one of the new senators you helped get elected through your activism with the Tea Party and your push for limited government. The first sentence of your book says, "This is insane." What is insane, and what are you trying to get at? What's the message of your book, first and foremost?
The message is this could be our last chance to turn things around. And I know politicians they cry wolf when there's no wolf. We talk about crises all the time. But just as a businessman or anyone with common sense, when the debt is bigger than your economy and the plan is to keep borrowing another $1 trillion more every year, there's not that much money in the world to borrow. We're going to have to print it. It means the value of our dollar is likely to go down. Interest rates will go up. So we can't pretend that this is not here. I mean, like Greece did or like Europe is doing. It's a very real problem. The other problem we have is political. You've got almost half of Americans who are getting something from government and the other half are paying for it. And we're on a track where 60% are getting something from government and 40% are paying for it. You can't sustain a democracy with that mix.
And is that because you feel that means the 60% is going to be voting a bigger and bigger share of the 40%?
It's hard to win elections if you're talking about limited government if the constituents want more from government. And you see that phenomenon on display in Greece. When the country is going down in flames, there's still people in the street demonstrating for more government benefits. And so we've got to understand we're in trouble, that we don't have much time, because if we are at a tipping point politically, and if we don't get those folks who are normally not interested in politics, but they're working and they're paying taxes, raising families, we've got to engage them in the political process this year. We can turn things around, but one of the main points of the book is we've forgotten what made America exceptional. We're a bottom-up country, very individualistic. I think every other country in the world was a top-down. Some king or dictator or general kind of shaped things from the top. But we were different, and we were successful because we began at the individual level.
Let's talk about the 21st century, because in the book you talk a lot about how this is the Republicans' fault as well as the Democrats' fault. What happened, and when do you chart the decline then of going from a bottom-up country to a top-down country? I mean, since 1950, we've had many more years where the government ran a deficit than a surplus. The federal government has only grown in size and scope, state governments, local governments. Yeah. What was the turning point, and also what are the Republicans' responsibility for the current mess we're in?
Well, you can go all the way back to the beginning of our country, and the fact that we didn't deal with the slavery issue when we formed the country means we ended up in the Civil War, and wars tend to cause a centralization of power. And we certainly saw that with the Civil War, some beginnings of national pension plans and benefits for veterans. But the real problem probably started Woodrow Wilson, and then you got into FDR and his programs with where he created Social Security, which was supposed to be a safety net, 1% of the first 3,000. And from there on, and I track it through the books, the Republican, Democrat, you saw all these departments started, Department of Education, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, and all of this.
Department of Homeland Security.
Homeland Security. Yeah. But what happened, I'm trying to help people sort through what's the real issue. The difference of opinion in Washington, you can throw out the political labels, Republican and Democrat, It's the difference of centralization of power versus decentralization of power. It's the difference of individual decision making versus collectivism. And all of the policies now that we're dealing with that are coming from the president and the Democratic Party, it's always central control, whether it's healthcare, education, the Dodd-Frank bill, of financial. And Republicans have been guilty of that. We've fallen for that with No Child Left Behind and Medicare Part D. And every time we have a compromise, it's more government, more spending, and more debt. And so at some point we have to say, not only do we need to stop spending more than we're bringing in, but we need to understand what made this country exceptional. And businesses figured this out about 20 years ago when Japan was handing us our lunch with their total quality movement, where Deming and Duran and others understood pushing decision-making down to the bottom, individuals coming up with ways to cut costs and improve quality. That's what works, and that's what made our country great. But we've forgotten that, and we have to turn it around this year, because I'm convinced that more debt, I don't think we can make it more than another year or two. The only thing propping us up now is the fact the euro's doing so badly.
So what do we cut right now? If it's now or never, what do we decentralize? What decisions do we put on the individual level? What departments do we cut? What big budget items do we cut now?
Well, I've got a whole chapter of freedom solutions, but first we have to decide that we need to balance our budget. The reason that our debates don't go anywhere is the president said balancing the budget is extreme. So to debate with him about where to cut is useless, because he doesn't really believe we need to. I mean, he would like to tax the rich some more, even though the wealthy in our country pay a greater proportion of the national taxes of any country in the world. So I don't know how much more he wants to take from them. But the issue is, do we agree that we need to stop spending more than we're bringing in?
So you need to win the argument first.
Well, and you're a proponent of a balanced budget amendment, but that's not even that popular among your Republican colleagues, right?
All 47 senators, Republicans, signed not only a balanced budget amendment, but one that limited spending to 18% of our economy, as well as required a supermajority to raise taxes.
And 18% is the historical average of revenue.
And that's where we know the private sector continues to be vibrant. But there are freedom solutions. First, just a flat, simple tax rate would do a lot to create millions of jobs. I mean, we've run the numbers on it with Heritage Foundation.
Okay, but that's not spending, right? I mean, that would grow revenue.
It would grow revenue, but that's got to be part, not raising taxes, but growing revenue. But we can cut spending. Education should be devolved to the states. We haven't improved education. We've heard it. The Commerce Department does very little to support commerce. A lot of the EPA functions can be devolved to the states. They're already partially done now, and there's a duplication of decision making. You go to transportation. We take 18 cents out of every gallon of gasoline salt, bring it up here. States have to fight to get it back. We could bring 3 cents up here to deal with federal roads, let states decide. And we would have better infrastructure, spend less money, and states could make those decisions.
What about entitlements and defense spending? Because that's where the real money is, right? So what do we do with entitlements?
The entitlements, we don't need to cut the benefits of those who are already on Social Security and Medicare. They've paid for it their whole life. We've made them promises. But if we made younger workers, give them options of different choices, and I mentioned this in the book. First of all, a lot of people who have alternative savings for retirement would probably take a buyout at retirement of Social Security. I would take half of what I'm supposed to get actuarially. If you were offered at retirement, okay, you can have a $125,000 lump sum now, or you can over the next 20, 25 years maybe get $250,000. Most people would say, it ain't going to be there, I'll take the lump sum and run, and we could save a lot of money. But we could also give younger workers just 401k style Social Security plans. It's interesting that they call that risky to actually save the money, but that would save us money at the federal level, but give younger workers real equity so that they're not dependent when they retire. I think healthcare has got to be individually owned. We've got to have our own insurance to go from job to job and into retirement. You know, Paul Ryan's mentioned the idea of, hey, keep your private insurance and let Medicare just pay part of it for you. Most of us would pay more than we have to pay for Medicare in order to keep real insurance. because by the time I get to retirement, it's going to be hard to find a doctor who wants to see a Medicare patient.
And you're only 5 years away from retirement.
That's right.
You talked about dependency, government spending, or people getting money from the government causing dependency. The defense budget, 20% of overall federal spending, has increased basically 100% since 2000. How much of the defense budget can be cut without hurting American preparedness or the ability to protect American lives?
I'm not sure what that number is, but I do know there's waste in Pentagon spending. I mean, we've identified not waste not only in the Pentagon, but all across the board. I've got a whole chapter on waste that Tom Coburn opens for me. We can find a lot of that, but we have to have a vision for what we want our military to do. And that's why the last couple of weeks I've said I want whoever our nominee is in the Republican Party to listen to some of the things Ron Paul is saying. Because the debate within the Republican...
But you haven't endorsed Ron Paul.
No, I haven't.
And neither Gingrich nor Romney or the front runners haven't. They're not really talking about cutting spending.
Oh, well, yeah. You hear Romney talk about cut, cap, and balance. He's picked up that plan, and really all of them, I think, believe we have to balance the budget. Ron Paul has talked about $1 trillion cut the first year.
Yeah. No, he's.
But I mean, talking about balancing the budget is an easy thing to do. I support this amendment, but I'm not going to tell you how we're going to get there.
Well, I mean, I mentioned a lot of things in the book that we need to, and there are a lot of obvious things, and not just the waste. We do need to rethink the money we spend on military and defense. I think Ron Paul does make a good distinction. There's a difference between spending on military and spending for defense. And the primary function of the federal government is to defend our country. We need to make sure that we have the technology, the intelligence, the equipment to defend America from a lot of new threats. And if that is not doable with bases all over the world, we need to rethink how spread out that we actually are. And I think we have to demand that our allies pay a greater portion of the defense. I mean, in fact, we're still in Germany. We were there after World War II, and we're still in South Korea. We're a lot of places. And we may need to be some of those places for deployment and protection. But I think it's fair to say let's rethink that and make sure we're spending money in the right places. And frankly, some of our spending is politically driven because a particular defense system or ship is built in a certain congressional district or state. Money is allocated not necessarily because our generals want it, but because someone in Congress wants it. Those are the kind of things we need to change. But the first priority of our federal government is to defend our people, and we need to make sure we do that well.
We're talking to you on the evening of the Florida primary, and you didn't endorse this time. You endorsed last time Mitt Romney. A couple related questions with that. One, just sort of why haven't you endorsed and what's the thinking? But also, just get into the thesis of your book, the now or never. Are you hearing the now or never argument from the candidates, from especially the two sort of frontrunners right now, Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney? They don't seem to be focusing as much, on exactly this topic and the pressing issue of the moment.
Right. I don't hear the urgency that I'd like to hear. At the same time, I understand from a candidate's perspective that you can't talk about doom and gloom. People need to feel some optimism. And I try to get that balance in the book, is sound the alarm, create the urgency, but show their solutions. But the point is we can determine our own destiny for only a certain period of time, and then other countries and events will determine our destiny for us. So there are things about all of these candidates I like, and I hope we can eventually wrap.
Well, you like the moon colonies?
The moon, those are one of the things I don't like.
And we were just listening to Mitt Romney singing. You can't like that.
No, I didn't hear that, but no, the things I don't like, the things I like. And I want to be able to say that this is not necessarily my guy, and I want to hold them accountable. But the big reason I'm not involved with the presidential race is I want to elect conservative senators, and through the Senate Conservatives Fund. And one of the things I've found is the people who send us $30, $40, $50 to help elect people like Rand Paul, they're very divided on who they think the president should be. And every time I say something nice about any one of them, 80% of the people who are trying to help me are mad at me. So,
well, talk a little bit about, you were instrumental in getting people like Mike Lee and Rand Paul, who are big budget cutters, in the Senate. You're one of the spokesmen for the Tea Party, or maybe not one of the spokesmen, but you're one of the conduits of the Tea Party Is the Tea Party still relevant, and where has it been? It doesn't seem to have the same visibility. Does it still have the same power that it displayed in the 2010 elections?
Well, no one wants to go to a rally or protest, given what the Occupy movement's doing. It's kind of put a bad stain on citizen activism. They're still there, and no one can speak for them. They're not any one group. I don't like it when folks say, I'm Senator Tea Party. I didn't start the Tea Party, but they came along and they were espousing the same concern I have. This is a very divergent group of Americans. I find libertarians, conservatives, independents, people who've never been involved with politics, some recovering liberals, but they're just concerned mostly about the spending and the debt and the growing intrusive government. And that's kind of uniting people. They don't all agree on the social issues, they don't agree on military and all of those things, but they know our country is in trouble, and that's why they're so potent. They are the united aspect of what the Republican Party needs to embrace right now. They're still there. They put down their signs. I see all over the country. They're organizing. They've gotten a little more sophisticated. But there are thousands of different groups, so you can't say that this group is doing that. It was interesting all last year. Everything that went on in Congress, they blamed on the Tea Party. The Tea Party's not here. They're out doing their own thing. And there's not one thing we did last year the Tea Party would have supported because it was bad legislation, bad deals, and we spent more money.
After the 2010 election, you had a quote to the effect of, "You can't be a fiscal conservative unless you're also a social conservative." That's a little bit different than what you were just talking about, that people kind of set aside social issues. They're focused on the urgency of the moment. Have you changed your thinking on that, or what's your thought about that?
I should have clarified that, because that doesn't mean to be a fiscal conservative you have to agree on all the social issues. But our biggest fiscal issue in our country is dysfunction in our culture and a deteriorating culture. The growth of dependency. Unwed births are correlated with poverty, juvenile delinquency, drug use, high school dropout, and the unwed birth rate has been basically promoted and paid for by federal policies. I mean, we've gone from below 10% when welfare was started to now over 40%, 70% for African Americans. But all the statistics show that you cannot participate, at least it's unlikely.
But that isn't why Bush and the Republicans, I mean, you voted against it, but push Medicare Part D. I mean, that's what's killing the budget, right? Not unwed mothers, defense budget.
It's the dependency on government, though. If we only took welfare spending back to 2008 levels, we could save over $2 trillion. I mean, and people threw up their hands, and the number of people on food stamps now is extraordinary. You got 1 in 7 Americans on food stamps. But it's hard to maintain a vibrant culture when so many people are taking from government and so few are paying into it. So
and you see that dependency as the motive force here. I mean, because when you talk about a deteriorating culture on another level, I mean, I look at the last 20 years. I've got 2 kids. And I see a great future for them. I mean, it's an America that's more tolerant, that's more innovative, that is more dispersed.
There are stats that look bad if you are focused on marriage and parenthood in that sense, but all these social pathologies
I'll just give, again, I'm not trying to make it a moral issue, but it is very much a fiscal issue. A high school dropout, which the highest correlation with high school dropout is coming from a broken family. It will cost America about $250,000 over the lifetime. So it's a fiscal issue, but I'm not saying we need to make it a moral issue or not be tolerant, but federal policies should be encouraging productivity and folks staying in school, and we just...
But the federal policy should not have anything to do with education, right?
Federal policy does have to do with it now, and what I'm saying is if federal policy with the welfare programs encourage self-development, independence, if education was more locally driven, where people could adapt it to the needs of the folks
who are there.
Well,
you're a big school choice supporter as well.
And so I don't want the federal government
How do you create a welfare program then, say, that actually promotes, because you believe in a social safety net that's provided by the government, I mean, maybe not. That's not your best case scenario, but
yeah, I would prefer that to be done at state and local level, and I think you could have a whole lot more volunteer organizations, mutual aid, and I think drag the churches back into it. They want to do it, but they've been displaced. And to try to do that from the federal level has failed, and it's hurt our culture, and I don't think it's helped people. Poverty is worse than it was when we started. More people are in poverty. And
I'm sorry to bust your chops on this, but more people are technically in poverty as it's defined by the government, but I mean, it's clear that if you're in a poor family now, you're better off materially than you were, say, being in a middle-class family in 1970. I mean, you've got a car, you've got a house, you've got air conditioning, televisions, access to education, access to medicine. So it becomes difficult, doesn't it, to just kind of say we've got more poverty now?
Well, yeah, we do define it differently, and a lot of our programs like school lunch, you've got in some cases over half of the students getting free lunch now. People are starting to expect these things, but these are unsustainable. I mean, if we could afford them, it's one thing. If people were moving out of poverty, then they could say it was working. But the point I'm trying to make in Now or Never, that it's not working. In fact, you can make a good case we're hurting people in some cases by trapping them in a situation it's hard to get out of. And we need to transition away from that. I'm not saying throw people out in the street, but we can do a better job helping people. We can save money at the federal level. But the bottom line is this: we can't afford to do what we're doing now. And we need to look at how to change that. And we need to get more people moving from government dependency and into work and productivity. That's going to help us kind of grow our way out of this problem.
Here's a question for you. You know, as Reason is a libertarian magazine, libertarian organization, and generally speaking, you know, totally our readers and the people who work here we're interested in a small, limited government that doesn't spend a lot, that doesn't borrow money so that our kids and grandkids are paying for what we enjoy now, things like that. But then there are the social issues, and so for instance, you're very pro-life. You have supported a flag burning, an anti-flag burning amendment. You support school prayer. A lot of issues that, whether or not they actually affect people on a day-to-day level, are kind of markers of a different sort of world. How would you say, like, why should libertarians vote Republican, especially given the last time the Republican Party had the White House and the Congress? They didn't restrain government or limit government whatsoever. Well, so what's the pitch now?
I think the new debate in the Republican Party needs to be between conservatives and libertarians. We have a common foundation of individual liberty, constitutional limited government, and we can rationally debate some of the things we disagree on. Because I don't think that the government should impose my morals or anyone else on someone else. At the same time, I don't want the government purging morals and religious values from our society. We can find a balance there, and it really gets back to decentralization. But if you want the government to say, I don't have the right to say something's wrong, then someone loses the right to say something's right. But the tolerance is going to come from decentralization and letting people make their own decisions. But we have to be able to put up with societal stigma of things we don't like. If you want the government to come in and say, hey, this group can't exclude someone else because they, if you want the government to do that.
And that could be, I mean, in terms of, say, like with healthcare reform, allowing Catholic hospitals to opt out of, certain must-carry provisions that would provide either birth control or abortion or whatever.
Yeah, and that's not imposing a moral belief, but it's allowing people to practice a moral belief. And again, I think there's a lot of common ground with libertarians, and I can sit down with a Ron Paul or Judge Napolitano and find a lot of common ground. We may not come to the same conclusions, but frankly, on the social issues, I generally agree that I don't want the government to push my religion or morals.
Are there Democrats who are also pulling in this direction? Because I'm thinking of people like Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, is pretty good on spending. Do you find any hope across the aisle for people who are also interested in reducing the size and scope of government?
In private, folks like Joe and some others will talk in a way that they agree with us. The problem is their political constituency all pushes for the centralization of power. And so for him to vote for something, for instance, that pushes education back to the states, the unions don't like that because they can control the things from the federal level. It becomes more difficult as it moves into some right-to-work states. So it's difficult to get elected as a Democrat to the United States Senate if you're not pretty well sold out to the labor bosses and the environmentalists. Republicans, despite what they say, we don't have a constituency like that. I mean, the pro-life groups will support Democrats if they're pro-life. NRAs support the Democrats if they're pro-gun. Wall Street gives 3 or 4 times much to Democrats, and so does Warren Buffett and other billionaires. So our constituency is pretty much individuals who want to be left alone or be successful, or small businesses. But even corporate America now is pretty much for the concentration of power. That leads to crony capitalism. Sometimes they can increase their market share by a government action easier than developing a better product. So that's why I think we're at a tipping point. Organized politics is pretty much towards bigger government.
Self-identified Republican registration has gone down even in this what should be an incredibly favorable climate for the Republican Party. And if you look in the sort of exit polls of the first couple of primary states, self-identified Republican membership is also down, but Ron Paul is pulling in a lot of kind of independents or people out there. As you look at those kind of demographics of the party, are you worried that the Ron Paul bloc is not going to be a Republican bloc? I'm
real worried, and as a matter of fact, I've done a number of interviews on this book that said if Republicans don't embrace a lot of the libertarian ideas that Ron Paul's talking about, like monetary policy, individual liberty, constitutional limited government, these things should not be alien to any Republican. But it no longer makes sense for Republicans to have the debate between moderates and conservatives, because a moderate wants to spend more money, just not quite as much as the Democrats. And when you're this much in debt, I can't tolerate that debate. It's not that I'm not tolerant, it's just that it makes no sense. I mean, we've got to figure out how to trim back and devolve the role of government. And I think if we're going to have a Republican Party that can be the majority party, it's going to have to be very inclusive of libertarians and a lot of the things they're talking about. We've got to rethink a lot of the things we're doing. And it doesn't threaten me to sit down and talk to someone who's got a different view on how to deal with the drug war or the military, if I know they believe in limited government, decentralization of power, individual liberty. We're on the same page. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book. If you have a shared goal, you can debate and compromise and still move in the right direction. But the problem we have now in Washington is the Democrats have a different goal. They're the party of dependency because dependent voters are dependable votes for them. We need to embrace the rest of America, and that's what was so good about the Tea Party. If you went to them, these were not Republicans. They didn't like any political party, but they were libertarians and conservatives and independents and people of all political stripes, and a lot of people who didn't have anything to do with politics. But they were united around this idea of limited government and less spending and debt. And that's the opportunity for Republicans. If we miss that and we end up with a third party, then the Democrats will be the majority party, and I don't know what will turn our country around.
What are the odds that the federal government will ever actually pass a budget again? And if they do, will it be less, just year over year in nominal dollars, than this last year's spending?
I think you'll see the House pass a budget like that, which begins to take spending down. I don't think it'll be irrational in the sense that it cuts right away, but it will start that path downward. I doubt if we'll get that budget through the Senate, but we can force a vote. We did that last year. President Obama's budget got a fair vote in the Senate. Not one Republican or Democrat voted for it. But we need to make it an issue this year because, first of all, you can't get a handle on your debt if you don't even have a budget. And the fact that you don't want to show a budget, which Harry Reid has said he doesn't, means you don't want to show your priorities or where you're getting your revenue and what you're spending. And we owe that to America.
Well, Senator Jim DeMint of South Carolina, I want to thank you. Matt Welch, my colleague at Reason. We've been talking with Jim DeMint, whose new book is Now or Never, Saving America from Economic Collapse. Senator Jim DeMint, thanks very much.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Matt.
Talk about the 21st century because in the book you talk a lot about how this is the Republicans' fault as well as the Democrats' fault. What happened, and when do you chart the decline then of going from a bottom-up country to a top-down country? I mean, since 1950 we've had many more years where the government ran a deficit than a surplus. The federal government has only grown in size and scope. State governments, local governments. Yeah. What was the turning point, and also what are the Republicans' responsibility for the current mess we're in?
Well, you can go all the way back to the beginning of our country, and the fact that we didn't deal with the slavery issue when we formed the country means we ended up in the Civil War, and wars tend to cause a centralization of power. And we certainly saw that with the Civil War, some beginnings of national pension plans and benefits for the system, and the less you remember about what really makes the country great. So there are a few exceptions to that, but term limits would fix most of our problems.
Well, we appreciate your candor, and we're going to hold you to that promise in 2016. We're talking about your new book, Now or Never, Saving America from Economic Collapse, which has a foreword by Rand Paul, one of the new senators you helped get elected through your activism with the Tea Party and your push for limited government. The first sentence of your book says, "This is insane." What is insane, and what are you trying to get at? What's the message of your book, first and foremost?
The message is this could be our last chance to turn things around. And I know politicians they cry wolf when there's no wolf. We talk about crises all the time. But just as a businessman or anyone with common sense, when the debt is bigger than your economy and the plan is to keep borrowing another $1 trillion more every year, there's not that much money in the world to borrow. We're going to have to print it. It means the value of our dollar is likely to go down. Interest rates will go up. So we can't pretend that this is not here. I mean, like Greece did or like Europe is doing. It's a very real problem. The other problem we have is political. You've got almost half of Americans are getting something from government and the other half are paying for it. And we're on a track where 60% are getting something from government and 40% are paying for it. You can't sustain a democracy with that mix.
And is that because you feel that means the 60% is going to be voting a bigger and bigger share of the 40%?
It's hard to win elections if you're talking about limited government if the constituents want more from government. And you see that phenomenon. If Republicans don't embrace a lot of the libertarian ideas that Ron Paul's talking about, like monetary policy, individual liberty, constitutional limited government, these things should not be alien to any Republican. The new debate in the Republican Party needs to be between conservatives and libertarians.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Matt Welch of Reason, and today we're talking with Senator Jim DeMint, a Republican from South Carolina. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Nick, Matt, it's great to be with you.
Jim DeMint has been a U.S. Congressman from 1999 to 2005. He's been a senator from the, the Palmetto State?
Palmetto State, right.
Since 2006. And you have promised to retire at the end of your current term in 2016?
That's exactly right. Most people stay here too long. The longer you're here, the more you're part of a phenomenon on display in Greece. When the country is going down in flames, there's still people in the street demonstrating for more government benefits. And so we've got to understand we're in trouble, that we don't have much time, because if we are at a tipping point politically, and if we don't get those folks who are normally not interested in politics, but they're working and they're paying taxes, raising families, we've got to engage them in the political process this year. We can turn things around, but one of the main points of the book is we've forgotten what made America exceptional. We're a bottom-up country, very individualistic. I think every other country in the world was a top-down. Some king or dictator or general kind of shaped things from the top. But we were different, and we were successful because we began at the individual level.
Let's